We're really excited to have you here, Jonathan. So if you don't mind just jumping in and introducing yourself and then walking through the presentation, we'll try and close up shop around 11:45 Mountain Time, so in about 30 minutes. But the time is yours, Jonathan.
Awesome. Yeah, excited to talk. Let me try and share my screen, and anyone an anime fan will find out real quick. My wallpaper there, any Demon Slayer fans. Um, there we go. Yeah, so short background, I think they kind of shared, but most of my life right now, I'm a new dad. So we just had our first kid. She's 2 months old. So that's super fun and just a new experience. We I've been out of state for a couple of years doing some Army training. So I'm in the Utah Army National Guard. So occasionally I get to go do some really cool stuff that has nothing to do with this, but just kind of some variety in life and just interesting and fun stuff. So if anyone's has been in the military, maybe shout out in the chat or something, that'd be fun. And yeah, Startup Stack really, that's what I've been building for past few years, and it's kind of a fun topic because it's like a meta, in a sense, it's kind of a meta discussion for the Midday Connect, and I'll try to get through this in about 10-15 minutes. And so kind of talking about, like, we're very rich in relationships. Like there's probably around 200 plus vendors that we work with closely, and that's always expanding, right? And so we see a lot of the services and the service providers that are trying to work with startups and the value they're trying to provide. And so we curate a marketplace for startup founders to actually build their tech stack. And so kind of in the Q&A, like, or you can share in the chat and we'll kind of review it. But like, if you have needs today, please share. And if kind of what's fun is, on our website, we have just over 100 deals listed that you can get for free, but I've got about another 100 that I'm aware of that we're just working to list. And so I'm happy to make connections from today's conversation. So let's talk about building your tech stack. So this is kind of an overview of some of the key points that I want to make throughout. The importance of like documentation and process debt, keeping track of your services, kind of some criteria to think about, and then we'll kind of go from there. But starting on a morbid note, imagine you get hit by a bus today. How would your company do? Thankfully, this guy, he just shrugged it off. He was heading to the bar. He got hit on the way. Maybe he was pre-gamed, and so his body was a bit loose and didn't get too injured, but he got up and he walked in just fine. This is ideally how your business should be set up. And this is true. Man, it's kind of awkward to like watch that over and over. Right. What does that have to do with your tech stack, right? The first main point that I want to emphasize is the importance of documentation. And I think it's a little counterintuitive, but as you're operating, you need to document your tech stack. You need to document everything that you're using and how it's being used. And if you have a culture in your business where you are deliberate about the tools that you're using, how you document their uses, and then make that accessible for everyone else within your company, even if you're just a one-person company, it's still worth doing. For me, I kind of do it compulsively, because if it's not very clearly defined how something's going to happen, then one, I have to spend extra time thinking about it in the future to do it. And two, I can't communicate that to anyone else. And so the more you document, there's just so many benefits. And I thought this quote was really great. I think a lot of us have heard of technical debt. Technical debt is this idea that you're building a technical solution. Like, let's say you're writing some code, and down the road in the future, it's going to be more expensive and more time consuming to fix it. But it's a deliberate choice you make now because of where your product's at, where your budget's at. You have certain constraints that you're operating within. I think it's the same thing with processes. So there's kind of this famous tech writer, Uncle Bob, and he had a quote about technical debt. And so I kind of traded processes to make the point that a mess is not a process debt. a mess is just a mess. Process debt decisions are made based on real project constraints. They're risky, but they can be beneficial. The decision to make a mess is never rational. It's always based on laziness and unprofessionalism. There's no chance of paying off in the future. A mess is always a loss. Now, I'm not trying to say anyone's like unprofessional or lazy here, but I like the point he's making that you need to, within this context, you need to document as you go. And if you don't, you're investing in a problem that's going to become bigger and bigger over time. And then when you need to hire someone, it's a problem. And I think, at least my experience, I've always worked in startups, and I've been hired sometimes, I've done hiring sometimes, and I've just never seen it done very well. And I hope that you're all at companies that do it great, but if not, hopefully you can be the instigator to change that pattern. Well, no matter what stage of company you're at, like having a good documentation process really helps. And it empowers you to build a stack that's going to save you a ton of money down the road. And so build this habit early on. And so just an example, and I'll show some examples of how we're doing this and how it influences our tech stack. But at a baseline, I think one of the easiest things you could do is get a free Loom account. You might upgrade pretty quick, but it's like 10, 15 bucks a month. And when you're executing a new process, something that you repeat in your business, record a Loom of you doing that, and then just store it, and then have a little how-to section. And then who knows, maybe you start doing well, you start selling, you need to hire someone. Now you have a reservoir, and you could just quickly create a doc. Hey, link to all these videos. Hey, here's your new training guide. And that's a great start. Other things that help, I mean, obviously just Google Drive, just typical like Word docs, but that's not really new or interesting to say. There are tools, there's actually free AI browser extensions that you can use that they'll like follow your mouse clicks and go from screen to screen. And it's kind of like a screen record, but it's tracking your process as you do it. Those are free. I find the free ones they don't produce anything that I could use. But companies like Tango do a great job. Companies like Lucid and Miro, you start to document well. Notion is great if you can build like an internal wiki, and you can start to document that. And that can also, all these places can be great sources to keep track of just a list of what have we signed up for. So this is just an example. This is actually what I was building last week and this week. So I wrote down our entire onboarding process, and I realized that I was creating 13 different tasks for my team to execute on. And so it was just a messy. So we cut that in half, cut it from 13 to 7 steps. And part of it was thanks to this new tool that we've been using called SalesBricks. This is a great Utah company. It's a great system. It's really ideal for like subscription, like SaaS businesses. But you can make it work for other use cases. Some of our product is SaaS, some of it isn't, and we're able to build everything through there. But that helped us to consolidate everything. And so part of it was, how do I create, configuring on the back end so that your team isn't fiddling around with it, and investing that time up front so that it's just ready to use. And then creating basically an FAQ of, and again, no one's an idiot here, but we're trying to make it idiot proof, right? And so could anyone, could someone with a 5th grade education come in and do it? Could someone with a master's, right? Like, do I have to be a mind reader? If not, then this tool is going to be used. It's going to be cost effective, and you know that you're getting your money's worth, that you're investing in it. And so with this, like, you could fill out the entire form without any further guidance based on which customer someone is. So, and this is like something that has been absolutely crucial to our business. This is built in Lucid Chart, being able to document as you go. So basically what I took is like, here's our sales process. And then here is the onboarding process. And then you color it, who does what and where. And it's like, this is behind the scenes. Like, if anything, my co-founders are like, hey, you overshare a lot. And I'm like, yeah, but it leads to really interesting conversations. And so, this is our actual like onboarding process. And so sales and onboarding, right? And so by documenting this, now you can there's so much that you can build from here. Now you can tie in tools, you can add little blocks, and so like I'm mentioning different tools throughout. But if you're not documenting as you go, one, you might not be getting everything out of the tools that you're using, but then also it's really hard to grow. It's almost like you're planning on not growing, because it does take time to work on your business. And as entrepreneurs, I think obviously the incentive should be to work in your business, to go and get the sales, to go and get the deal and grow revenue. And I would argue that investing time into this documentation, one, your burn rate's gonna be a lot lower, and you're gonna set yourself up to scale. So that's I think not discussed enough with tech stacks, your software and services, making sure you're getting the most out of everything you use, because every dollar matters. And I know that we can have a broad range here. Most people are early stage, but some people here may be in 100-200 people companies. And I think everyone can approve here. So this is definitely catered to a pretty early stage company. Like the more sophisticated a company gets, ideally, there's an IT team that's managing licenses and they're keeping track of everything that's being used. But even then, like let's say I'm an employee, oh, I see a new tool, I'm just going to do a free sign up. The IT team is almost never going to find that. And so again, this is a new solution I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but one, start earlier is better. And there are two sources of truth that I've actually really appreciated using. One is a password manager, and two is just your bank account. And so if you configure your, whether it's QuickBooks, FreshBooks, going directly into your bank account, you're going to see just what you're actually paying for. So you might have more tools because there might be free, or you never upgraded to the paid tier. But just knowing every month what tools are we actually paying for it. I mean, that's the most important. Just to see, okay, I'm actually, spending money. Is this getting used? And then I think you can pretty quickly, especially if you build it from the start, you can configure that so that you know what's accumulating there. Password manager has been my new favorite here. So as I have team members and they're creating logins and they're trying new tools, I don't want to hamper them. I don't want them to follow a rigid process. But if they create if they save it in our password manager, then one, I can access an account. We can communicate and access accounts as needed between each other. But then we can also, it's actually a great source of truth. It's formatted pretty well, and it's very cost effective. There are other tools that I've found out there that claim to be able to kind of help you manage your tech stack. And if you're aware of any, share in the chat, mention in the Q&A. Like I'm still looking for like this, the tech solution that would just like audit, like here's every account you've ever made. But I don't know if that's quite feasible. I do know one company that's building that, but it's a bit early for me to recommend them here. So this is kind of the bread and butter. What's the criteria? So I'll just kind of go through these pretty quick. So startup friendly, right? You want companies that love startups. If they don't love startups, but they'll take you anyway, you're probably not going to be happy by the end of your relationship. Because you're going to be low priority to them because you're not a high spend client and they're always going to bias towards enterprise. We even see that where we'll get a startup discount listed. It'll go on the startup stack. I try to re-engage and they're like, hey, we're actually focused on enterprise right now. And I'm like, of course you are. It's big money. But hey, startups are cool too. You should focus on it. So an interesting aspect, if they're a startup themselves, that's a big pro and a big con depending on how you spin it. If you like that they are flexible and creative, maybe they can do more custom, they're more communicative, they like the feedback. Oftentimes you can get a really good deal. Maybe you trade services. There's a lot of negotiation power that you have with each other. And, for example, with SalesBricks, they've been really great to work with. And just early on, I've just been using it for free just to get a feel for it because some of our use case was a little weird. But I documented absolutely everything that was working well. What was my experience like? Things that didn't work, bugs that I found. And I was able to help them to log a handful of new bugs that was like very valuable feedback to their team. that's an intangible value they don't have to go and schedule customer interviews for. There's a lot of ways that you can work within the startup ecosystem and create wins. So I would say early on, you can be a satisfier and optimizer. Satisficer, right? The goal is, hey, this is good enough. And optimizer is like, is this the very best? Optimizers are going to burn a lot more money than those that are satisfied. If it's good enough for now and it checks some of these other boxes, be a satisfier. Later on, as your business matures and you're hitting more volume, you need to start biasing towards an optimizer. But the more you optimize, the more picky you get, you're going to pay more. The next thing is prioritizing relationships. Ideally, I think it's great when you can just email someone and they answer back and you're not entering into a chat bot, but that's not always the case. So the example I give is two banking providers. You have Mercury and Bridge Bank. Both are awesome for startups for different reasons. Mercury is like very branded. It has an awesome UX. It's what we're using. Bridge Bank is someone that's going to be listing on the startup stack soon. And they're kind of a bigger bank that has a startup solution. What's the difference? Mercury is probably, they have a support rep for like every 50,000 clients. They're not getting on a phone call with you. Bridge Bank, you have like an account manager who will get on a call with you whenever you need it. Mercury is fine. I don't need to call my banker. But if you need to call your banker, you probably are going to hate Mercury. So it's just another example. And then obviously just knowing how all your tools fit together, making sure it's cohesive. People obsess over integrations, but we have a lot of no-code solutions, things like Zapier that can, you can bandage together a very impressive user experience on a really tight budget. I would say begin with the end in mind. You need to know, is your data trapped? Assume you're going to break up someday and move to another tool, and how hard is that going to be, and have that in mind going into it. Data, that ties in with your data storytelling, because if you're jumping between a lot of different tools, it's going to be very hard for you to communicate, especially internally or to investors, what your data is going on. Well, this data source logged it this way, and then you've got this Frankenstein monster, and you're trying to say, hey, look, these key metrics are real, but it's like, well, is it? And then how perishable is the software that you're using? I mentioned that especially with AI, there are just certain tools that I'm watching very closely. If like you used to be the industry leader, and you may or may not continue to be, depending on how well you're able to implement some of these technological advances. So just keeping that in mind. So we're almost done here. I think, yeah, that's the last. So I just say, always ask for a discount. I'm dumbfounded. I think everyone knows to do this and very rarely does, because it's uncomfortable, it's awkward. Like there's just kind of that incentive, like, why would I ask for? But always ask for a discount. Act like you're entitled. Hey, I'm a startup, I'm poor, I'm on a tight budget. Like if you communicate that, like they know that, they'd like you to start using their platform. But if you're just like straight up, hey, I really don't have the money right now, let them kick you out of their pipeline, or say, you know what, I'll give you a sweetheart deal, hopefully you stick around and we'll make it work. Happens all the time. And I just don't see people ask for discounts. Even when I work with some people, I'll reach out like, hey, we're really flexible, here's kind of our sticker prices. And then they're like, hey, yeah, we just can't pay for that, we'll move on. I'm like, I literally said at the start, let's negotiate, talk with me about your budget. There's a give and a take there. And then ask your peers what their stack looks like. The more, you just connect with people, especially comparable businesses dealing with similar headaches, that's going to help you to learn from them. And then there's a lot of aggregation websites. We're, in a sense, we're one of them. If you're part of any VC accelerator network, I know that Y Combinator, for example, has a pretty good internal kind of resource to help with your tech stack. There's a lot of others out there. There's a lot of other marketplaces where they'll kind of like build a marketplace plus add another tool, like Nacho does that. There's a lot of options, but the nice thing about those is you are getting some leverage behind, hey, when they go talk with a vendor, they're saying, hey, give us a startup discount, I've got 100,000 people I can share that with. They're going to get a better deal than you asking on your own. So if you get stuck, sometimes you asking directly, you won't get it, but you could just go find a link and then someone's already pre-negotiated that catered to you. So from there, I think let's just talk and Q&A and go until Taylor kicks us out. So thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Jonathan. That's awesome. I think just to set the stage a little bit for the Q&A, what I found with the startup stack is there are a lot of tools that Jonathan has pre-negotiated those discounts on. And so that's, I think, one of the benefits of just following and becoming a member of the startup stack. Jonathan, do you have, there's some questions and comments in the chat, but do you have suggestions for everybody in the group as to where to start navigating or how best to navigate what you've done at the startup stack, or like building their tool set in their company? Like, what is the first step that people should start doing? Is it a gap analysis? Is it an inventory? How would you suggest we approach that?
Yeah, I'd recommend look at each process or each business function and make sure that it's just optimized. So actually, let's see, I still have one of these papers here. I just pull out a lot of papers sometimes and document processes. It's like, this is kind of, again, this is very like, sometimes you just got to think on paper. But on the left here, you can see, I mean, you can't really see it, but I documented our entire onboarding process and just like, what are all the steps? What are all the tools involved? And listed it out. And then from there, I was able to just see, well, how can another software solution make this more efficient? And just seeing how our current tools aren't serving that. So I think going by business function, if you've grown to where you have the actual teams, then they can do that internally, and at least once a year, that's worth doing. As far as like how it goes with the startup stack, if you just go mystartupstack.com/offers, that's the whole marketplace, really, just all the deals that we have. And it mostly sorts by business function, sometimes jobs to be done. We're doing an overhaul where you'll be able to sort it better. And we actually have an AI chatbot that'll be able to discuss with you and help you build your tech stack. So I'm excited about that. But when it comes down to it, that's what aggregation is typically very manual in this space. And so going to a marketplace like that is really good. Like if you just search like any company that you want to work with before you buy, always search like that company, like Zoho startup program, for example. And the bigger the company, the more likely it is to already exist. And if it's a small company, they'll probably just make it up on the spot for you.
Cool. Dale, do you want to unmute yourself and go through your question? And then if anyone else has additional questions for Jonathan, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay? This headset's kind of wonky sometimes.
Yep.
Okay. Mike, this is a really cool like value proposition. Like I was just looking at your website and seeing all the tools that you're offering discounts for. I'm curious to know about whom you're targeting with your messaging and your marketing. Like, are we trying to reach startup founders and co-founders? Is this someone who is coming into business operations with little knowledge of potential business tools, software tools? So let me start with that kind of first part of my question.
Yeah, mostly just focus on founders. So there's kind of three people that we work with on that, which would be, founders, who's our user, the people trying to build their stack, right? And then you have vendors who want to work with startup founders, and then you have partners who kind of white label it and offer it to their audience. And so really our goal is just to reach as many founders as possible. And so like, here, hopefully, I mean, if there's one takeaway that you have as far as just who we are, this is totally free for you. And we never want to charge founders ever, because I think it's a total, it's kind of a paradox, because if you, I don't want to charge you to save you money, and so some solutions are out there for that. Yeah, that's who we work with. And Ole, I didn't know you were here on the chat, so that's awesome.
Have you ever have you how tell us more about the origin of the term tech stack? Like you're using this term tech stack, and I'm curious to know if you like how long you've been using that, and have you had any have you ever like had any confusion between you and more technical founders if that might use that term differently? I'm curious to know if that's ever been part of your experience.
Yeah, it is kind of slang. Really, it's just software and services, right, that you use and work with. But like, what's your stack? Like, that's kind of a slang that's pretty common. I think, I don't know which came first. I don't know if tech came up with it first or if people that are into biohacking came up with it first, right? Because biohackers, it's like, what's your supplement stack? And it's like, well, I use 50 milligrams of magnesium at night before bed, combined with the root of the ginseng root and all this stuff, and that's my supplement stack. And I don't know which came first, if it was on Reddit or tech circles or not, but it seems to be a fairly common term now, I guess. But
I think maybe
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Dale, what you're referencing, and I agree, most of the developers that I've worked with will say their tech stack is maybe the languages that they're writing their code in. So it seems like, Jonathan, what you've distinguished here is more of a tool stack. Like, what tools is your startup using to operate? So kind of what the tools and technology is that your employees are using to execute or operate.
exactly, like when it comes, yeah, and I see some comments
Yeah.
about it, like you have certain, like, okay, what languages are you built on? So like, okay, we use React Native and Python, and then we use Django, and right, like there's a whole mix of what you're building on the back end and the front end. This is just taking it more layers further and saying, who are your software providers? Who are your service providers? And I think broadening that definition is really crucial. And I do want to give a shout out here, Ole Shved. He's actually, as mentioning, a really cool company, Stackoon, and they exist to help you to document your tech stack. So I think if people have this like early adopter mindset and they want to work with a company that's trying to solve this problem, Stackoon is who I'm most excited about. And yeah, so they kind of talk about tech stack as well. And essentially they're using a browser extension, and he could pitch it better, but just for the sake of time, like basically you have a browser extension that's able to understand what are all the tools that you're using and then document and manage from there.
So is that kind of addressing what Karen's question is kind of what does the documentation for that tool stack look like?
Yeah, so I think that is a software solution that will become the big scalable solution there. Barring like a robust solution like that, I think from day one, I mean, it just depends how many things you have. I like the password manager because it's really scalable with all the random logins that people are just making. Like if it's single sign-on and it's free to start and it's freemium, you're gonna collect dozens of those. And as much as I hate that, and I don't like people signing up for stuff unless they're like being delivered about it, I know that's just the user behavior that's incentivized. But even if you just have it, I like what you said, Karen, about start with a Google Doc. Honestly, it comes down to your documentation preferences. I can tell you how we've done it. Like I showed you that whole lucid chart diagram. And then from there, I have other versions where I start to expand and show the bigger cloud of it. But if you simply have a list somewhere, you're better off than a lot of large companies, because the bigger you get, you're going to lose track of it. And at the very least, if you're watching your bank account, then you're going to see the money leaving, and it's like, did I get my money's worth for that or not?
Yeah, that's a problem that we had a client that did face that problem. We would go through and review expenses that they thought were technology related, and so we would go through and no one knew like what is this specific tool? Why are we paying for it, and who's using it? And then some of them were old enough that like nobody knew, or nobody had been using it. It's just it's interesting because if you're targeting founders and the founders are coming into this, well, this is the first time I've heard the term tech stack used to refer to this broader application of like all the tools that are being used to operate a business, not so much to.
I think mid commentary just disappeared. Yes.
Yeah, talk about tech stacks, right? Hopefully Dale will get back on his tech.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, his hardware stack just failed.
yeah, exactly. Jonathan, I think we're close to time here, so really appreciate you. Maybe one last question that I had is that you could leave us with some of your advice and wisdom on would be what is the best way to understand which tools, like if I were to go through the 100 tools on the startup stack, which tools integrate the best? So yes, you can use Zapier or their APIs and stuff like that, but is there a better way or a different way to understand how to make sure you pull in tools that will work nicely together?
Yeah, each function is going to answer that question a little differently. So an example I ran into today. So I love FreshBooks for, I think it's a very user-friendly way it's a bit easier to use in QuickBooks, but QuickBooks dominates integrations. And so if you're just trying to check the box on your accounting function, hey, or your controller, whoever it is, are my books up to date? I think FreshBooks is actually a great solution. But if you need, for example, if you use Forecaster and you're doing financial modeling and you want your actuals every month to just update automatically, then I wouldn't recommend FreshBooks and I'd recommend QuickBooks. And so the more integrations that you need, the messier it gets, especially like marketing, CRM, that's where that gets more busy. Something like Lucidchart, for example, like I'm sure they have integrations and I'm sure they're great. As a user, I've never felt the need to look at that. And so especially like operations-based things, I think doesn't matter as much. But if you're, that flow through from marketing to sales to onboarding, that's one of the most essential business functions where you want a consistent record all the way through. Because if you have to recreate records in each tool, your chance of data duplication goes through the roof. So those are just some examples.
Okay, that's super helpful. Jonathan, what's the best way if people are interested in learning more about Startup Stack and what you're doing, like looking at the pre-negotiated discounts with all those tool providers? What is the best way for them to do that? Yeah,
and just as a side comment, I like Harley, what you said, operational stack. We've always focused on like what is essential to the operations of your business critical tech. So I actually like that comment. Yeah, if you go to mystartupstack.com, currently we don't even require login. So you literally just join the email newsletter and you'll keep in the loop on updates. So I think it's worth it as you're procuring software. Check. I kind of shared a list of websites that aggregate. If we have it, I hope you come and work with us. But if there's another website that has a deal that we don't, like, go and get the deal, right? And so mystartupstack.com is where you can work with us. You're welcome to, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. Like if you've ever found a deal from us, if you have feedback on things that you want. One of my favorite things is when a founder tells me, hey, here's a list of things that I want in the next 6 months. And that helps us to know which vendors to prioritize finding. So if you're like, hey, treat us like your outsourced accounting, or not accounting team, a procurement team, and happy to hop on a call, or if you just want to send an email, whatever works the best for you. And I just saw you requested the link. So there's my LinkedIn if you want to connect. There's the website, and then I'll just share my email as well. But yeah, we have a lot of cool things in pipe. We're actually transitioning from a CMS system like Webflow into our full custom web app. And with that, there's going to be a lot of cool new features that we'll be able to roll out. And it's all just free for founders. So I hope you follow along and get value. So.
Awesome. Jonathan, thanks so much for your time, and thanks everybody for joining us. Hannah's posted this month's agendas for speakers for the rest of the month on LinkedIn. So check those out. We'll be back here not next Tuesday because of the Juneteenth holiday, but the following we'll be back here meeting at the Midday Connect. So thanks all. Really appreciate you joining, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.